Okay, so yes, good morning after I can't say a weekend, a long week, and we are again back in a weekend where we are proceeding with the ABAP on HANA. So we have already gone through the new ABAP syntaxes, the SQL, the application server level syntaxes, the core data services, and it's all the portions. And we also see we have also seen how we can create the UI application without any help from a UI developer. Okay, so a kind of a backend developer can also work as a full stack developer. And now you might also have an idea of how CDS is, how versatile a CDS is. It's not a normal view, but it is far beyond that. Now, today what we are going to cover over here is one more HANA artifact. So we are starting with one more HANA artifact called AMDP, ABAP Managed Database Procedure. So let's just go with the agenda for today's session quickly, and then we would be going with the practicals. So today we would be going with a bit of a flash of what we did in the earlier session. Then we would be learning the main determining component. So we all know why we started on ABAP on HANA is we want to push anything and everything as much as possible on the database layer. So new ABAP syntax is something that we might have heard of. The CDS is also something we learned, and now AMDP is also coming. Now, when we have more than one uh, object, more than one way of satisfying our requirement, how we can decide? Many a time, it might also be the case that more than one thing can be used for developing our uh, object, developing our development requirement that we are getting. But what should be the determining factor? How we can decide upon? How we can weigh down the pros and cons upon which particular artifact we are choosing? That is something we would be seeing. Then we would be going in more deeper into what is AMDP and what are the different types of AMDP methods which exist. Then, as we had discussed during the earlier webinar and also during the earlier session, that AMDP seems to be a class, but it's not that plain class because we are um, dealing with a totally new language over here. It's an SQL script which is helping us over here, right? And that is why what we would be seeing over here is a full understanding of SQL script. That is something we would be going through, starting from the variable declaration to the select query to the fuzzy search to the parallel processing and everything and anything we would be going through. So we would be learning a full new language in these upcoming 3 sessions. Then we would be learning how I can pass the parameter in AMDP, and we would be covering the one more pending topic that we have parked earlier, that how we can pass the select options. So we learn how I can pass the parameters in a CDS, but question would be how I can pass the select option in a CDS. So the answer that we discussed earlier was the CDS table functions. So same we would be going through in this particular session. Now let's just quickly go into the system and see what we do have over here. Okay, so in the earlier session, what we started with what was called is what we call it as a DML, the data manipulation language. We learned that using object model annotation library, we were able to make our view, create, update, delete enabled, and hence the transaction processing capability was also enabled. Then we proceed further, and what we figured out is it's not only the backend content that we can manage from here. We can also have some sort of UI designing that we can also take care from this particular view. Okay, so for example, we learn the metadata extension as a part of that, using which we were able to design the line items that would be visible, the global search mechanism we applied along with the fuzzy search, the value help we provided with two methods, consumption value help definition and foreign key association methods. So using this, we were able to design the UI as well from the backend CDS artifact. And to segregate, or we can say to separate out both of them to make them manageable, we make the metadata allow extension equal to true, and this enabled us to create a separate metadata extension for the dedicated view. Then what we started learning was the very basic concept and very core and very important concept of CDS designing is called the virtual data model, the VDM designing we started with. We learned that we can have two kind of views, the interface views and the consumption views. When it comes to interface views, there can be a view which might be picking the data from the base tables. For example, here we are picking the data from EKKO, it means it's a transactional table, transactional view that we are creating. And if it is transactional view that we are creating, it would be nothing but interface view, which is creating interface for the final application. So we created interface view, type of which would be a basic view because it is directly getting the data from a table. Then we created a composite view, which is a composition of a base view. At the same time, it is also a composition of a certain database table on top of that. So this is called a composite view. Still, this is also not the view that we would be using for our actual applications designing, for our actual application consumption. And for that, we learn something called consumption view. And this consumption view is something that we finally exposed as an OData service. And this particular view would ultimately be used when it comes to the actual UI application designing. Okay. So the naming convention you might also follow is the basic view and the composite view would always be an interface view. And that is why the naming convention would always be something underscore I. So I is for interfacing and C is for consumption purpose. So just by looking at its naming convention, we would be able to figure out what is the purpose, why this view was created, what is the purpose it is solving in the particular environment. And we also created certain model value help. So we created a view, CDS view with data category called value help, and here we created a model value help. So user was saying, give me only the supplier code, the name and the country. So we were able to achieve this, and we use this in the final applications value help over here, either via the consumption value help definition that we learned earlier, or exposing it as an association and using it via the foreign key association. This would also enable us creating a value help. Okay, this is what we learned till earlier session. So it is a quite a lot thing on our plate to learn on the CDS, and these all the things would ultimately help us going forward. Now, as we have already went through multiple HANA artifact, as we have already learned multiple HANA artifact called new ABAP syntaxes, the CDS views. Now it's time to learn AMDP. But let's just quickly go into flashback of what all the things were actually providing us. So new ABAP syntaxes, when I talk about new ABAP syntaxes, or I can say the CDS view over here, or I can say the AMDP. So definitely something which is very much supported in all of this is a kind of a versatile SQL statement, or I can say open SQL syntaxes. So open SQL syntaxes which is there in all of them. Okay, so let's just learn of something that we already know. We'll come to AMDP later. So we know that whenever we want to create a SQL syntax or an SQL statement which gives us the data presented or modified or prepared in a format which we want to present to the user. If we are using open SQL syntaxes, the execution would occur on the database layer. So for achieving better performance, we can go with the open SQL syntaxes. And here we can use new ABAP syntaxes and CDS view both, right? But now when we are writing a logic which is very much applicable to that program alone, very much applicable to that application alone, it is a non-reusable and application specific logic. Then in that case, we would be going with the new ABAP syntax, because when I say a new ABAP syntax, it won't generate any sort of database artifact. But when it comes to a CDS view, okay, CDS view generates a reusable DDIC artifact. When I say DDIC artifact, it generates the CDS view entity, and another thing that it would generate is called SE11 view. So it would be centralized. So let's just say I want to use this at 5 places, then this is something which I can achieve easily. But using new ABAP syntaxes, it would be a application specific logic which I'm writing, and still I'm ensuring that I am getting a better performance. Okay, so this would be the initial selection criteria that I can think of. Third thing is, each time SQL definitely is getting versatile and versatile day by day, but each time each and everything that we want to write doesn't uh, like or I can say cannot be achieved using a single SQL statement. It cannot always be achieved using complex built-in functions which I am using. Okay, instead what I have to depend on over here is some sort of application server logic. And when I'm talking of the application server logic, at that particular point in time, we should have a versatile application server library, and it's called 7.4 or 7.52 or 5352 plus this new ABAP syntax library that we are using. And this is something we learned. So we learn many syntaxes that can help us over here. Now, when it comes to a CDS view, this is something that we are always lagging off, because CDS view, as you can see, we were not able to debug that because ultimately it is just a select statement that was starting from a point, ending to a point, and whenever that statement ends, we are getting the output. Definitely, we are using multiple associations and everything in between, which is giving us a opportunity to prepare the data in the form we want. But still, other than the built-in function which are provided by CDS views, we are not able to use certain intermediate I can say intermediate processing logic. So here it allows us only SQL, or I can say annotation based logics. But when it comes to AMDP, it allows us not only SQL based but also the intermediate logic that we are always looking for, called as a SQL scripting. This is something that we can achieve when it comes to an AMDP, and this is something that we would be coming through. So AMDP is something that we are fully writing on a SQL script level, and hence it provides us the feasibility to write not only SQL statement but intermediate logic using SQL script. So starting from whole set of variable declaration to let's just say writing a select query, to writing a if else statement, or I can say conditional statement, to looping part, to internal table processing like select, insert, update, delete, everything, to I can say parallel processing, to a fuzzy search on column. Is all the things can be achieved because we are having a full scripting language. Like you can think of a full ABAP language which was getting executed on an application server. So ABAP language which used to get executed on I can say application server level. And here we have a full SQL script, and we can say it gets executed fully on my database server layer. So when I am writing a particular scenario, saying I want a particular program which gets which executes my certain master application settings. So certain settings which are there, which are setting the data for my master tables, and which would ultimately help my all the rest of the application to behave. So this is only one master application program definitely which would be there in the system. but still I want that the performance wise they should be very much efficient. So definitely this non reusable application specific logic which I'm writing on the database layer still gives me a functionality to writing me allows me to write 1 to 31 plus joins over here, which is more than sufficient for me to write any of my code logic. It has also given me built-in SQL level libraries, built-in SQL function libraries. Whenever I am writing a particular application specific logic which is not going to get reused any time, then at that particular point in time I can go with the new ABAP syntaxes. In case we want to make it usable, or I can say make it reusable, then also we do have a way that we can create a function module out of that, a method out of that, and call it again and again whenever we need. But that would be application server artifact that would get built. It's not the database server artifact that would get built in case of a CDS view. When it comes to a CDS view, it's not that only for the backend designing that we would be able to use that. Other than writing, or I can say other than providing application server level functionality, it also provides us a very good functionality of designing, or I can say controlling UI behavior. And this is only CDS view can help us over here. No new ABAP syntaxes or AMDP can actually overtake CDS compared to this. And that is why you might be seeing that all the new technologies which are coming these days, be it a cloud application programming model or be it a RESTful ABAP programming model, everything and anything is now built on top of a CDS view. Okay, definitely we can still have a flavor of new ABAP for its handler, the AMDP for its other handler classes, but still when it comes to the base skeleton which is built, it is built fully on top of the CDS views, or I can say CDS view entities. This is what which is actually taking the market right now. Now, so this cap and wrap and everything which is there, which is ultimately built fully on top of CDS view, because it doesn't only give us the functionality of application server layer, but also gives us a functionality of designing the UI and controlling the UI behavior. Okay. Other than that, it gives us a functionality of I can say performing anything outside of SAP box. I can say performing any operation outside of SAP box using OData services, or I can say REST API. This is something which can be generated easily out of the box without writing any sort of custom code logic with the help of CDS view with merely one single annotation. So its versatile annotation library is something which can help us in tremendous way, and that is why whenever you are creating any sort of such application which is a browser based, which requires OData services to be generated out of that, you want to control the UI and backend designing as a part of that, definitely you would be able to use CDS view as a part of that. And here the artifact that you would be creating definitely would generate some or another database artifact, but it in itself it would be very reusable, and that is why we do have a VDM model where interface views which we are generating won't only be limited to a single application. It can be reused multiple times whenever the same set of data we would be needing in upcoming applications, right? So this VDM model is something which is also there solely lying with the CDS view. It is not there with any of the other artifacts. Now, when it comes to AMDP, it is there to overcome the limitation which ultimately CDS view was also having. CDS view alone cannot handle the application server logics. I can say AMDP is there to overcome limitation of CDS view. I can say to provide a area to write intermediate processing logic. Okay. So CDS table function is one of them, scalar function, table function, whichever are there, those all can be written in AMDP only. One live example you might have also noticed when you are already with working with SAP from, let's just say, almost a decade now, you might have also observed that whenever we are working on a huge processing, for example, the MRP run, material requirement planning, or I can say bomb explosion, material bomb explosion, these all the things might take a huge amount of time and it would result into a background processing. But when it comes to an AMDP help the system execute the same task on a database layer, and that is why you might have heard these days that we do have AMDP body. So we can have a normal body as well. The normal body is nothing but a body which is giving us a class-based interface where we can write our logic and it would get executed on a application server layer. But when it comes to an AMDP body, it gives us an interface, same class-based interface, but here whatever logic that we are writing, we would be writing it in a separate AMDP methods, and hence it won't get executed on a application server, but instead it would get executed on a database layer. And hence this MRP run and bomb explosion and everything which used to take times of an hours, now they are really become real time execution, because now HANA has switched everything and anything. When it comes to an execution perspective, they have switched most of them strictly to the database layer, and this thing is only achievable when we are using AMDP. So whenever we have complex application which is having tremendous backend logic getting executed on its own, then of course it won't be a single select query that we would be executing. It won't be certain tables iteration that we are doing. We would need some sort of intermediate processor. We need some sort of architecture which gives us a functionality of writing conditions, looping, multiple table comparison, and all those processing we would be needing. And here AMDP is something that would come at our rescue, and we can use AMDP for that. Okay, so new ABAP syntaxes and CDS views are something that we have already seen, so you would be able to visualize it thoroughly. CDS view, AMDP, when it comes, definitely we would get go through it at a glance, and then you would be able to see, okay, this is what we are talking about and how it can actually help us. So now we have more than one HANA artifact. New ABAP syntax is CDS view and AMDP. When it comes to a application specific, go with new ABAP. When it comes to a far versatile logic, we want to interact to the world outside and we want the reusability as well to be in place, go with the CDS view. But when it comes to a huge application processing logic which we needs to be shifted to the database layer to make that process more efficient, and any sort of standard SAP enhancement also needs to be done, go with the AMDP. Okay, so these are the multiple HANA artifacts that we do have on our plate and that can be used. Lively, when we would be creating the new ABAPs, when we would be creating the AMDP, then it would become more clear how we would be able to create that and use that and consume that going forward. Okay. Now, as we are talking of all these things in a while, let's just say, let's just learn on the AMDP in a bit more deeper manner. What is an AMDP? It's a term that we are discussing all this while, but what is an AMDP? What does it stands for? So it is a ABAP manage database procedure. So if you see, I have broke the term into three sections. It's ABAP manage database procedure. So when I say it's a database procedure, it is quite clear that it is nothing but a procedure which gets executed at database layer. So you can think it as of a stored procedure as well. When we think of an SQL statement, okay, let's just again go back to the old college days. So the old college days DBMS concept that we learn is still in use, and it would be there in the use till the time we are still in the development activity. It's never it would never get old. Okay, the old DBMS concept that we actually learned. What we learned as a part of that, we learned that a DBMS concept says we can have two sort of processing logic that we can write as a part of an SQL. We can write a SQL queries. like a select queries, CRUD operation, select, insert, update, delete, alter, everything that we write. When it comes to a deeper logic, we might have also learned something called PLSQL, which is nothing but a procedural language. Right. So on the top of an SQL, a procedural language has been built which gives us the liberty of writing a full execution procedure, and that would behave as a full language. That is something we used to write at college level as well, called PLSQL. So this PLSQL is nothing but a database procedure intermediately. In terms of HANA, it is called AMDP, but it is nothing but a PLSQL that we have learned at our college days. Okay, the name is kind of becoming more and more fancy. That is the only thing. Other than that, this is something that we all already know, because we all have some sort of computer science basics or some sort of IT basics. I can say 100% computer science basics, but because we have people working over here from all the many, I mean, from different backgrounds, be it IT, EC, and everything. But all this while working with SAP, we know that the new ABAP syntaxes and everything, the actual classical ABAP as well, has a select queries, then we are writing some sort of logic, then we are processing this, then we are passing it in the output. Every sort of procedural execution that we are doing, okay, can be termed as a PLSQL. And this would be strictly on the database layer. And this PLSQL is database procedure. Now, when I say a PLSQL, it would be 100% managed by my SQL level syntax only. But this AMDP is actually managed by ABAP. And that is why we are saying it is ABAP managed. It means ABAP is managing that. Now, when I say ABAP is managing that, what it is doing? ABAP is giving the entry point, or I can say triggering point for this procedure. So ABAP is giving the entry point or triggering point, or we can say um, the creation definition. The creation definition of this procedure is being provided initially by ABAP. Then internally, system would convert it into a separate database procedure. So it is managed by ABAP and fully written into a database layer called ABAP Managed Database Procedure. So it is managed by ABAP and it is internally nothing but a database procedure, and that is why it is called AMDP. So when we think of a architecture of an AMDP, okay, we might have heard all this while that AMDP is nothing but an AMDP method, right? We heard that AMDP is nothing but an AMDP method. AMDP can also have an AMDP body. Now, if we are already into SAP, we know that a body is nothing but a object-oriented enhancement point SAP has actually given. A class-based enhancement which SAP has given is called a AMDP body. What is the skeleton of a body ideally? Forget about AMDP. How a body looks like? A body would be nothing but some sort of interface. On that interface, we would be having some sort of class created. And in that class, we would be having n number of methods. Right? So, and when I talk about a class would be having a definition and a class would be having a implementation. So this is how a architecture of normal class looks like. A class would be having a definition, class would be having an implementation, and within this class we would be having multiple section which says, okay, this is a private property of a class. So it says private section, a public property, or I can say a protected area of a class, and a public area of a class, or I can say public section of a class. Whatever thing that we are writing over here, for example, here I am writing some sort of variables. So for example, I am specifying data LVA. These are nothing but its particular attributes. When I am specifying methods in a class, saying get data, this would be nothing but a behavior of a class. So one such behavior which we are creating as a method. So there can be two kind of method ideally we can create. One, a normal method that we are already creating. You all know a class, you all know a method. A method can have, let's just say, get data. It would be getting, let's just say, for example, a company code as an input, getting the data as your output. Everything is possible. And you are writing your plain ABAP logic. That is something we can call it as a normal method. We can also have, so this normal method that we are talking of has its all the logic written in ABAP. When it comes to one more type of method, we are talking of a AMDP method. Okay, and here the whole logic is actually being written in a SQL script. But if you see what we are enhancing over here, it is again nothing but a same class having multiple visibility section as a normal class does have. A class has an implementation where we are doing the implementation. Okay, a method get data, and here we are saying end method, and here we would be writing our old code logic that we want to write, right? Everything that we want to write over here, we would be writing that sort of code logic over here. We can write this code logic in a ABAP level code if it is a normal method, like any sort of normal method that we are creating till date. We can also write our code logic in SQL script to convert this into AMDP. What would change over here? The execution, or we can say executor engine, would change. It won't be any longer an application server, it would be a database server which would be processing that. Now when we are writing anything in one language, let's just say, for example, you are writing your code logic in SE38 in a normal ABAP language. Now you suddenly learn something and you started doing your logic in a Python language. You have to inform your compiler that I am writing this logic in a Python, so use a Python compiler to execute this, right? Same way, whenever you are starting with writing your code logic in a AMDP method, or you are writing your whole logic in a SQL script, you should inform your compiler that you are writing a AMDP method and not a normal method, right? And for that, what we do have over here, is something called a marker interface. So we are having some sort of marker interface over here that we might write as some sort of interfaces, then IAF, AMDP, marker. So that's sort of a database specific interface that we are writing. And this particular interface that we would be writing over here would signal our compiler that this particular class can have a AMDP method as well. So this from a signal perspective. Then as I can have both the type of method, a normal method and an AMDP method, here I should also specify something which signify, okay, it is an AMDP method. The moment you specified that this is an AMDP method, it would ultimately change the execution cycle of this particular method from application server to a database one. So rather than going to all these particular things in a single go, let's just start with developing a normal class, a normal method that we already know, then we would be enhancing it to an AMDP one. Okay. I'll just say, let's just open this particular. Just close this. Now, when I say I want to create a class, okay, that would also be a good point over here, that whenever I am saying I am creating a class I can also create from SE24, right? So let's just go with something that we already know. Let's just start with SE24 to develop the class. When I say I'm going to SE24, I'm developing ZBM22 I can say AMDP01. I am creating a class over here whose description is AMDP class, and I am creating a normal public class over here because it should be visible to everyone outside, because I want to use that somewhere, and I am creating a usual web class. The moment I say save, deleted that. Let's just go with the local. Now I do have a class. Seems very good. It's available. I can just activate that. Everything is going well over here. Now, as I mentioned, when you want to create a AMD class, you have to provide some sort of marker interface over here. So how that marker interface would be looking alike? When I say marker interface, it would be definitely an interface. I would be writing if AMDP. Then as I say, it would be a marker one. I would be saying a marker because it is marking, it is signaling the system that this is an AMDP class. And here we would be specifying name of the database we are on to. Till the time SAP has only provided AMDP method for HANA database, so it would always be a HDB. But in future, if SAP comes up with an AMDP for any other database, then also it should be very much feasible, and that is why SAP has given the name very much generically. I can say IF AMDP if you see marker and HANA database. So it is a marker interface on the HANA database which is generating the AMDP methods. The moment I say enter, you would get that this particular class contains stored procedure. And why the system come to know that it contains stored procedure? Because we are writing AMDP marker interface over here. So it implies that in future we might create some sort of method written in an SQL script, and that SQL script return method that we are writing as a AMDP method are nothing but a stored procedure. And in case we are writing stored procedure over here, SAP GUI doesn't understand that, because this whole SAP GUI is designed in a way that it only understands ABAP. It doesn't understand your stored procedures. Okay. And that is why we won't be able to do any of our development over here. Whenever we are starting with AMDP, we would need a Eclipse for that. So let's just go to Eclipse. Now you have two ways. Either you can create your own class over here by using new ABAP class over here like this. Give your name and everything, and it would create a class. Or if you have already created one, you can directly say new, navigate, open ABAP development object, give the name of the class. It's ZBM22 AMDP01. If you open this, you would be finding that this class would get opened. And as you can see, it is having the same structure as we discussed. A class is having a definition, class is also having an implementation, right? It is having multiple visibility section, public, private, protected. Okay, and here we would be doing implementation. On the top, we would be defining whatever we want to define. Perfect. Now, next thing we are interested over here is making, or we can say converting this class into a AMDP class. How we can do that? We can say interfaces if AMDP marker, and we would be saying HDB So we just wrote this interface. If you see, we don't have any sort of error. I can say activate this, and this class would be converted into an AMDP class. By looking at it at first sight, you won't be able to figure out whether it's a normal class or AMDP class. Just this interface is there, which won't do any sort of behavioral change till the time you don't have a method in it. Okay, so we do have a class along with us now, and we can use that. So let's just say I want to go step by step and create a normal method over here. Okay, so let's just say this is, by looking at it, what does it look like? It's nothing but a normal ABAP, right? It's a normal ABAP. We have a dot delimiter, we have interface, public, private, protected section. So this is nothing but a ABAP class. When I do have a ABAP class, I can create a methods as well. So in a normal ABAP class, let's just try creating a normal method, and this normal method we would be using into our program. Then we would be creating an AMDP method, which is also giving the same behavior, same set of input, same set of output, everything. And then we would be trying to consume this AMDP method into our particular program. Okay. Same thing we would be doing over here. So let's just start with something that we already know, and then we would be converting it into a AMDP method. So here we would be saying, I want to create a method. When I want to create a method, we know that we have to write a methods, right? So I'm writing a methods over here. Like whenever I'm creating a subroutine in a program, what I usually write, I write a form, end form. When I want to write a function module, what I write, I create a function group, create a function inside that. There I write function, end function. Same way, whenever I'm creating a method, the method is also the same thing. In a function, we have two sections and interface. We would be specifying importing parameter, then we would be having the logic. Same way, we are having a definition over here, and here we would be having the implementation. It is the same design guideline which SAP is following everywhere. If I want to define more than one method, I can say colon. So that is what I am doing. Like we have a data declaration, same way. Here, let's just say I want to define a method for getting a PO data. When I say I'm defining a method, it can have multiple type of parameters. It can have a importing parameter, exporting parameter, changing parameter, returning parameter, everything. Let's just go with the simplest one. I am saying that I am importing a parameter. The type of that is nothing but I can say pass by value and pass by reference. I am expecting a company code to be part of my input, and its type would be EKKO dash. And I am expecting a returning parameter, or I can say an exporting parameter. Returning would be a wrong word over here. We want a exporting parameter as a whole set of PO data. So I can say ETPO data, and its type, let's just say I want to define a type over here. So I can say TTPO data I am defining over here, and let's just define the type declaration. So I can say these are nothing but my interfaces. These are my method definitions. These are nothing but my type declaration. So it is pure ABAP that we are writing, that we used to write earlier. Same thing we are doing over here. Here I am saying I want EKKO, EBLN. And we are defining a table type also, because that is what we are looking using over here. So we did the type declaration over here. We did the method definition over here. All we are left out over here is writing the actual logic, which would process the input company code and get us the list of purchase order in the ETPO data. That is all we are actually left out with over here. So the system is saving this. So it seems it is now saved. That must be What did I miss? Why it is behaving abnormally? There was some confusion, that's why. Fine. Now, if you see, the definition is clear. We did the type declaration. The method is also over here. Now, it says you have only provided the definition, but implementation of this method is missing. To implement this method, we can write it manually as well, or like whenever I'm creating a subroutine, how would I do the implementation? I would say double click. Same way over here, you can just say click over here, and here you would get an option of add implementation for this method. So now if you see, we are very clear. We are getting the skeleton of this, and now we are not having any sort of error over here. So it means the moment I define the definition and implementation, though I have not written any sort of code logic, I can say empty body method we have, and we are still okay to go, and we can still activate the class. So we have our method with the definition and implementation available. Now, next thing that we want to go over here is I want to write my code logic, which says get the PO data over here. For getting the PO data, what we would be doing is ET-PO data. This is something that we want to get the data in. So how I can write my select query? You can write select EBLN. It's a plain ABAP logic which I'm writing. It is just we are writing the logic in a class method. From EKKO into table where my BUKRS is equal to nothing but my P underscore BUKRS. Very straightforward thing. I'll just say activate this, and I do have my method. So it seems to be an AMDP class, but here I created my normal method. Okay. So the simple question that you would be getting always in an interview, that can I have a normal method also in an AMDP class? So the answer is yes, you can have n number of normal and n number of AMDP methods in a same class possible. The only prerequisite is we should have a AMDP marker interface involved. Now, if I want to create a consumption program for this, which would consume this particular class, this is something we are still going with a normal method, a normal object-oriented way of programming. That is what we are doing right now. I want to create a ABAP program. I'll just say next and say finish. It would create a normal program for me, right? I'll just say initialization, start of selection, end of selection. Now I want to call a method. How I can call a method? If you see, it is nothing but an instance method. If you are not sure, what you can do is you can copy this class name from here and go in the environment that you are actually feeling comfortable with. SAP GUI. I'll just say SC24. Definitely I can't edit anything, but I can still view. So if you see, it is nothing but an instance method. It is having a parameter called PBUKRS ETPO data. The information over here is passed by value. In the source code, you would be finding that I have write a logic to select the data. These are the parameters in the signature. It is the same thing that we used to write in a SC24 editor. I have just written the same thing over here in a Eclipse editor. That's the only thing. It's still the same thing. Just this marker interface is there, which is not allowing us to do any sort of editing in a SAP GUI. That is why we are working with a Eclipse. Now, when I say I want to call this method, which is an instance method, What will I need? I would need an instance of this class. So I can say instantiate the class object. I can say I want to create an object. We learned this in new web syntax. How I can create an object? I can say AMDP
Sumit,
obj. Yes.
like initially you have created in class that what to say interface marker, right? There in GUI we have to create a marker and come here and create a class. I mean, and develop a
So there are
class.
okay. So whenever you are working with AMDP class, the
Uh-huh.
ideal way that you would follow is that you would directly go over here and say, okay, create a AMDP create a class over here.
Uh-huh.
It's a plain one, and whenever you are creating a class, for example, that B01, it would just create a simple class for you, and that class you can use like we created it from SAP GUI. Why I created it from SAP GUI? Because we are all are aware how we can create that. But if you create it from here, the same skeleton you would be getting from here. Then you
Yeah,
would be writing the marker interface and everything. You won't be able to find any difference whether you create it from here or from SAP GUI.
but that marker
Okay.
you have given the name in the interface, right?
Yeah, and this is the marker interface is a database or I can say stored procedure identification that there can be a stored procedure, and that is why you
Mm.
won't be able to do anything on the SAP GUI from this step, and that is why we need Eclipse for sure.
Okay,
Okay.
so this name you are given, right? I have AMDP marker HDP. So
Mhm.
this is common name, like we should give
It
only.
is it is very common name in n number of AMDP class that you would be creating. You would always be writing IF is for interface AMDP marker. It is marking this class that it contains AMDP methods. And
Mhm.
on which database we are? We are on HANA database. That is what we are actually pointing out. Okay. Now,
Yes, got it. But what I'm asking is that we have to use the same name or we can give different name?
you have to use
Oh.
same name. For example, I want to use this class somewhere. For
Mhm.
example, ZBM22 AMDP01. Then I have to use this name only, right? If I want to call you, I have to call you with your name only. Same way, this is created into the system. If you just go back,
Mhm.
there is a AMDP marker interface which is created by SAP. It is there into the
Okay, that's
system.
what. Okay, okay. This is a standard one like that I'm asking.
Yeah, that is a standard one.
Okay, okay. So
Right.
anywhere if you want to create a EMDP class, we have to use the marker name as this.
Exactly. It is a marker interface for DB procedure. So you have to use this only
Okay,
for sure.
okay, got it. Yeah. So that it will identify as it as a marker. So this is a
Eh,
like identifier.
that is identifier that would signal your compiler that this is a
Mm.
MDP class.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
Now I want to call this method, so I'll just instantiate this particular. Here I'll just say new, and what particular class I am interested in is, so I want to instantiate this class. Now, as I have instantiated this class, I do have an object of that, so I can call the method. So I can say ALO AMDP OBJ and get PO data. I can say shift enter, so it would give me the interface. I can also define the input if I don't want to go with the hard coding. And I can directly get the LTPO data. And let's just start displaying this in a ALU. Same way, we do have a pretty printer, Shift F1. Use that, activate this. Now, let's just execute this. I'll just say ABAP application executing this along with the company code. So we are expecting that I am getting a data because it is nothing but a normal class, normal method, nothing different. It's the same thing. We are getting the data. Now, the main change that we are planning to do over here is we want to go with an AMDP method now. So how I can create the AMDP method? So as we discussed, if you want to create the AMDP method, we would be using SQL script as a language. But the SQL script as a language that we would be using would always be in the implementation section, because if you see from the definition perspective, is this a ABAP language or AMDP SQL script? It is not a specific language. It is just a declaration that we are following. So same way, if I want to create a AMDP method, for example, I'll just copy this information from here, paste it over here, and I'm saying it is a database procedure which I am creating. I just provided a different name. Everything else is still the same. I do have an importing parameter passed by value, exporting parameter passed by value, and it does have the system set of data types. I'll just say I want to add the implementation for this, adding the implementation. Still seems the same. So just by specifying underscore DP doesn't signify anything. Now I have to point out to my system that this is the AMDP method which I want to create. For that, like here we do have method and just the name over here. Here we have to provide some additions. Here we would be specifying after the method name before the dot that this method's implementation that we are doing, we would be doing the method's implementation by database procedure. We are writing this execution specifically for HANA database. So that is where it would get executed on HANA database. Language we would be writing, our whole code logic would be into a SQL script, and we are willing to perform a read only operation over here. We don't want to perform create, read, update, create, update, delete. So we can perform create, update, delete, but for now we are going, or we can say we are starting with only read only operation. Okay, so if you see now we have a difference. This was my normal method. Here it is my database procedure. Here we are saying we are doing the implementation by database procedure. For HANA database, it should get executed. Language that we would be using would be an SQL script for the implementation, and we are performing some sort of database reading. Now, as you can see, the moment I write this particular logic, I just started getting this particular error. It says the body of an AMDP method cannot be empty. So good thing is system started identifying that this is a AMDP method. Okay, so system now knows that this is an AMDP method for sure, and it started giving us some error saying body of AMDP method cannot be empty. But you might be remembering that when I created a normal method, I was able to create a method with an empty body, right? So let's just start writing our logic. I'll just copy this code from here, paste it over here. So we don't have the error that we were getting earlier, but we are now getting it. We are now getting another error. So let's just try resolving error one by one. So we would be able to reach to the right syntax. What does it say? That the literals that span lines are not allowed. Internally, it is trying to say that it is not able to identify this line as a comment. How I can give comment in AMDP method? Here, rather than writing double inverted comma, you would write double dash. I can say for inline comment, use double dash. Okay. Next thing I am getting error over here is called into table. Now, if you just go into flashback of PL/SQL or SQL script that you are normal SQL select query you were using, into table is not a database layer syntax. Okay, into table is something which is a bit of ABAP specific. Now, what we have to write over here is a syntax which actually system understands. So we are removing this into table from here. So we have to remove this ETPO data also from here. Here we have to write ETPO data equal to. So it is the same concept of new ABAP syntaxes that we are following. Definitely select not related to select query, but related to LHS equal to RHS. So this is how the variable assignment would be done. We are saying LHS equal to RHS. So I can say select query syntax with LHS equal to RHS. Now, if you see we are getting an error over here EQ. Now, if you remember in the CDS view also we got this error. What we find out over there is English based characters are not supported over here. We have to use symbolic character. I can't write EQ, but we have to write a equal to. Now, in CDS view, how I can define a parameters using a colon. Same way would also go over here. I would be using colon for specifying the variables. So I can say no English char, English based operators, only symbolic one. For example, it is equal to, not equal to, likewise. Parameters using colon. Another thing, if you see, it says the body of AMDP method close unexpectedly. So how we close the method? We close the method using a dot. Here it should be a semicolon delimiter. I can say delimiter is nothing but a semicolon. And if you see now we are getting a bigger error. It says EKKO is unknown. System is not able to identify your EKKO here altogether. So when you are not able to identify the system, your system is not able to identify database. If you see, it says EKKO is unknown. ABAP object and DDIC object must be declared in the using clause of the method. So the DDIC object it is, right? EKKO is a DDIC object. So you have to specify it in a using. So I can say DDIC objects need to be specified in using. So now if you see, we don't have any more error available with us. What did just change? This is how it was looking like earlier. This is how it is looking right now. We have LHS equal to RHS. We are using double dash for commenting, column for parameters, semicolon for ending a particular statement, and anything and everything we want to use, we have to specify using. Why is this using is required? Because if you see where we have write this logic, we have write this logic in a ABAP class, but it would get executed on a database layer. It means the moment this class, this particular method would get executed. Okay, this is very important. The moment the AMDP method gets executed for the very first time, system would generate a stored procedure out of it. So if you see, the moment AMDP method gets executed for the very first time, the system would generate a stored procedure out of that. And that is why it would be visible over here, but actually it would get executed on a database layer. And that is why system won't be able to identify EKKO which is lying at your SC11 level. Instead, you have to give a pointer using a using clause over here. Now, if I just say activate, and if you just copy the name of this method, try using it over here. So I just replace the name of a normal method along with that of the database procedure name, AMDP method name. I'll just say execute this 1710 and execute. And here I'm getting the same set of output. So now, if you see, I'm calling a database procedure. I'm calling a AMDP method and not a normal method. It is getting executed on a database for a HANA database, and we are getting the data. And now this is an first AMDP that we just wrote. Okay, the same set of execution we are getting over here, but now this whole execution got executed on a database. This also get executed on a database layer for sure. But here the entry point over here is a application server method. When it comes to this, system would identify that this particular method has a database procedure linked to it. It just execute the database procedure instead of executing an AMDP method and calling a select query. This whole thing would get executed on a database. Okay, so and now if there is only one statement that we wrote, if we write 50 more statements, control would still be there on the database. It won't come back to the application server. Here, if I write 50 more select query, 50 more lines of logic, system would come back to the application server, then again point back to the database if there is a select query or any sort of database specific logic. Okay, so that transition would also get reduced, okay, because we are on a database layer now. So this is how initial AMDP would look alike. We would be going more deeper into that. Till the time, is it clear of what we did till now?
Uh, like last part, you said something like it will go to the database and application. Can you
Okay.
tell?
So here, if you see, we are calling our AMDP method. I just specified that the moment you are triggering an AMDP method for the first time, it would generate a procedure. So what we can expect is, if your system is going inside this method, it is going inside a procedure. A procedure is lying at database layer. So if I say I am writing this whole logic for 3 more time like this, I am still at my database layer. This statement would get executed. It would get the data in ETPO data. Again, it would execute this statement. But where will my execution point? Where would be my execution control? It would be always at database layer. But when I say I am in a normal method, and if I just try writing 3 more select query, I'm not copying. I mean, I'm just copying it just to show you. But ideally, it would be a n number of code line that you might have written. Here, I would be at application server. Here, my logic would come back, go to the database layer for getting the data. The moment I am getting the data into ETPO data, I am again coming back to application server. Then I am triggering the database layer, right?
Yeah, got.
Because this particular thing won't happen whenever you are on the AMDP.
Yeah.
Um, and this is just a select query that we wrote because we just started with what we already know. We would be going more deeper onto other processing logic that we would be writing. Then it would become more obvious and clear. Comment this out. Just happen over here. Little. Okay. Now, after having this, let's just go one more step forward. let's just learn something of a class, because AMDP is all rotating all around classes. Now, when I say AMDP is rotating all around classes, class can have many things. Let's just again go back to the interface that we already know. We created two methods. Here this method looks bit scattered, because if you see system is giving red and everything, because SAP GUI doesn't understand your SQL script. Now here we do have an attributes. When I say a attribute, I can have multiple attributes mentioned over here. As I have interface as a part of this method, system would ultimately allow you to have these particular attributes in the attribute section. So these are inherited ones. Now what we want is, I want to create one more variable over here called global variable. Okay, I want to give a global variable over here. For example, I am saying type, I am giving it as an integer. Okay, so it is simple global variable I am creating over here, and I want to initialize this global variable over here. Um, so it is nothing but a attribute which I created as a instance attribute GV, where this is a global attribute, and I just provided a value called 10 over here in a normal instance method. If I try using this variable in a if I try using this variable in a AMDP method, if you see, system is not able to identify this variable, because if you see, this is the first editor that you would be seeing till now, where we have two layers interacting on the same editor screen. We have whole of this logic being written in a ABAP, and this whole logic written in an AMDP. So this whole logic, which is getting executed on an application server layer, and this is getting executed on a database layer. So variable which are there on the application server and on the database layer are always different. So it means system won't be able to relate to, connect to any sort of global variable that you are declaring at a class level. So I can say any sort of any class level global variable are not accessible. System won't be able to access any sort of class level global variable. This is something which is not possible when it comes to an AMDP. If you want to relate it more easily, you can think of a RFC function. Okay. For example, you are creating a RFC function. You might also have experienced that you are always going with pass by value and not pass by reference. Why is that so? Because when you are going with pass by reference, the system reference would be passed. Now let's just say you are on a SAP ERP system calling a function of SAP CRM. Then the memory parameter in both the system would be different. And that is why whenever you are creating remote function module RFC, system won't allow you to create anything of pass by value. So for example, if I say I want to have a exporting parameter ETPO data over here in a normal method, I'm removing this from here. This would become my pass by reference. This is not pass by value now, so it is pass by reference for me. But if I just start removing this from here, it says in AMDP context, the parameter of the method can't be a reference parameter. because we are in a different system, we would be on a different layer and one application and one database. So pass by reference is not possible. So if someone says, if can you identify whether a method would be a AMDP method or a normal method just by looking at the definition, we can say 95% of the case we won't be able to identify, because the pass by value is something which is supported by both. But if the parameters which we are specifying is strictly passed by value, then there are 5% chances that that method can be a AMDP method. But if it is having any single variable in the interface which is a pass by reference, then surely it cannot be a AMDP method, because pass by reference is not supported, same as that of the RFC. Okay. Now, this seems to be one of the basics, and this would help you going forward a lot into the future when you are doing the development. Now, let's just go one more step further. So when we are declaring, or we can say when we are discussing AMDP, we created something called database procedure. When we are creating AMDP, we know that we created AMDP class. Within that class, we created AMDP method. When we are creating AMDP method can be of two types: database procedure and database function. So what we created till now is called database procedure. What we are also going to create and we would be learning is database function. What is the difference? How I can say that this is a database procedure, how I can say that this is a database function. Okay. What we are mentioning over here is nothing but a method, right? A method signature can have a importing parameter, exporting parameters as well, changing parameter as well, and a returning parameter as well. So these all the things are possible when it comes to a AMDP method. Now, when I say importing parameter, how many importing parameter a database procedure can have? We created only one, but I can create n more. So importing parameter database procedure can handle is 0 to n. Same also goes over here, 0 to n. How many exporting parameter a database procedure can have? Same, 0 to n. But how many exporting parameter a database function can have? I can say 0, or I can say not applicable. Because when I'm saying it is a database function, it doesn't work on exporting. Instead, it works on a returning parameter, and there would always be one returning parameter. When I say a changing parameter, how many changing parameter a procedure can have? Same, 0 to n. And again, database function does not have any sort of thing to be done when it comes to a changing parameter. Returning parameter is something which a database procedure also cannot have. So there is a difference. So database procedure always works on importing, exporting, and changing. It doesn't work with returning parameter. And database function works with a importing and returning parameter. It doesn't work with exporting parameters. Okay. So when I say return, why it should always be one returning parameter? Why I cannot have more than one returning parameter? You might have seen in a function module, subroutines everywhere. Whenever I am saying return, LVA, I am at line item number 7 over here. When I am saying 8, 9, 10, and here I am writing some sort of code logic. If this gets executed, will my line item number 8, 9, 10 would get executed by any chance? No. That is why system always supports by definition only one returning parameter, be it in a normal method or an AMDP method. And that is why SAP came up with a definition called database function, and this database function has a returning parameter, and that can only be one. How can I define a database function? What is a way I can define a database function then? To define a database function, I can have to define a database function, I would be going in the same direction. I would be creating a method. I would be using that for creation of a database function. I'll be just going over here and say, I want to create a database function. So let's just say, let me just copy this. And in this particular session, we are mainly going with what we already know, and we are just changing it in a flavor that we can also try accommodating database function on AMDP methods, ABAP managed database procedures onto that. Okay. There are still many more basics to come. The session parameters, the importance of session parameter, which one are mandatory to be used, and everything. That is something we would be going, we would be learning very soon. So I am creating one more method called database function, for example, over here. Here, if you see, it is saying implementation missing. What we mentioned is a database function, whenever you are specifying, it cannot have an exporting parameter. It can always have a returning. So what I'll be specifying over here is importing value this, and I want a returning. Now, if you see, I'm getting a error. This error should be very well known to all of us. A returning parameter must be fully typed. So when I say fully typed, we had learned something in a new ABAP syntaxes. What is fully typed parameter called? A fully typed parameter is something which is having the list of columns specified very thoroughly. Here we have, and the list of key definition. If you don't want to go individual, what we can specify over here is we can say with default key. Now this particular type is fully typed, and then and only then we would be able to use it in a returning. It is not specific to AMDP. This is a basics of object oriented. The returning parameter should always be a fully typed, and that is why we need a with default key over here. I'll just say this method's definition is implementation is missing. I'll just click on this, and now we do have this. Now, when we are saying I do have this particular definitions implementation started, let me just start with the writing of this logic. So here, as we specify by database procedure, what we would be specifying over here, we would be saying by database function. For HANA database, where actually this would get executed, language that we would be using would be SQL script. We would be also be interested over here only in reading the data, right? Now, what we are willing to have over here is again a set of logic which would help us getting the data and returning it to the system. If you see, again, it's an AMDP method, so body of this cannot be empty. So let's just start writing the code logic. What is a parameter that we do have over here? As it returning, let's just mention it as a RT for now, for example. Okay. Whenever we are writing something in the database function, it has a returning parameter like this. So we have to specify a return parameter. So what we would be doing over here is we would be specifying that I want a logic which would return the set of data. And for that, what we would be writing over here is we would be saying return. Okay, and this return we are specifying the set of columns. So we are saying select EBLN, BUKRS and all the columns EBLN. Okay, and where we would be selecting the data from, we would be selecting it from EKKO, where my BUKRS is equal to P underscore BUKRS. Now we all know EKKO is something that we have to specify in a using clause. Here, if you see, we have not mentioned anything with the RTPO data. System also won't get confused. Reason being, it is a return statement. A return statement always returns the control along with this data. And as I can only have one returning parameter in a method, the data would always get assigned to that particular statement. So RTPO data is something which would get populated whenever I am writing a return PO data over here. Okay, so I do not need to worry of how the system would be able to identify to which variable this data should be assigned to, because I cannot have more than one returning parameter. So now this is something that we created, is called database function. Skeleton wise, if you see, here we have a database procedure specified. So this skeleton is something that we would be using 95% of the time. Database procedure, AMDP procedure, is something which is being used very vastly. Database function is being used very rarely. Here we have LHS equal to RHS syntax, and here we do have a return statement. If you have n number of code line written preceding that, then you can also write that. That is also possible. Now I can say activate this. I'll be copying the name of this particular database function, and let's just try calling this now. Again, to call this function, I'll just comment out this line that we had already. We are saying hello AMDP obj. Because it's a AMDP method, we have a receiving parameter now. It's a AMDP function. Here we are specifying PBUCares, and here we are specifying LTPO data, because it's a database function. This is something that we already learn in new ABAP syntaxes, working with object oriented. I'll just say activate. Now, this is a final moment. So let's just see how the behavior of the output execution would be. So let's just try executing this. Let's just say I want to say 1710 is the company code for which I want to get the data. I will just say execute, and I am getting a very beautiful dump. Okay, it says AMDP method is implemented as a database function. It is therefore not possible to call this method as a direct ABAP method. Okay, so what we learned is, when it comes to a database procedure, direct ABAP call is possible. But when it comes to AMDP function, direct ABAP call is not possible. So if I cannot call the database function, AMDP function directly, how I can call AMDP function? That would be a question. Okay, so there are two ways to call a AMDP function. One we would be discussing today, one we would be discussing in the upcoming section whenever we would be finding a need to. So there are two ways to call a AMDP function. One way is via CDS table function. So CDS table function is one way of calling a AMDP function. Okay, so we cannot call a AMDP function directly. I can say direct call to AMDP function is not possible. We have to create a CDS table function instead. So that is the last point that we have actually left for the CDS view, because here we need the knowledge of, or I can say basic knowledge of AMDP as well. I'll just say I want to create a CDS table function. I'll just go over here, say other, and we would be saying CDS. In the CDS, in the data definition, we would find next over here I can say EF01 table function. I'll just go next. Next again. Here you can search for define table function with parameters. You can just say finish. And now you have the skeleton of how a table function would be looking alike. Here what you would be getting is a full skeleton of a CDS table function, and here you would be able to define a CDS table function. Here we have to provide the skeleton that we used to provide over here in the method section. What we would be defining is that its type would be a nothing but a EKKO. This is the name of the parameter, and the type would be BUKRS. What would be the parameters and where actually the logic of this can be written? So here if you see, I don't have anywhere where I can write my select query. I don't have any way where I can write my logic, but here there is a methods mentioned. It says it is implemented by a method. Here I can specify the name of the class, which says there is a class and its method called getPO database function. And here I have to specify all the relevant information. Here I have to specify mandate. Here I have to specify EBLN, and everything and anything would be delimited by let's just try checking the data element, because ultimately we have directly put the name on the database side. EBLN, BUKRS, BSTYP has EBSTYP. BSART has ESART. And now you can activate this. Whenever we want to write the code logic for this, how we can do that? Here we specified implemented by this method. Okay, so here we have to change the definition also a bit. So we would be commenting this out. Instead, we would be specifying a static method. So for definition of a AMDP function, you can't go with an instance method, you have to go with a static method. I will be specifying class methods. I'll be just specifying the same name, get PO database function that we specified, and a bit of change would be there whenever I am going with a AMDP methods definition. Here we have to specify the reference of the table function for which we are doing the implementation. So we are saying get PO database function. Okay, and we are doing the implementation for this table function. So it would be a two-way binding you can think of. Here we are specifying for table function, and here you are specifying the name of the table function. and this table function is ultimately calling this method. And here you have to specify the list of column that we actually used in the declaration. So because if you see, we don't have a parameter definition specified over here for the returning. It is specified over here. And here, whatever parameter that you are specifying, the same should match in the select query. It's mandate EBLN, BUKRS, BSTYP, BSART, EBLN, BUKRS, BSTYP, BSART, and ER name. And now you have to activate this. So what we just did is we created a CDS table function. In the CDS table function, we specified that a method called database functions method implementation method would be triggered, and it would give you the data that you are looking for. This method is activated. Now, next thing that we have to do over here is we have to call this particular CDS table function. Okay. So whenever it is a normal method, how we can call it? Using a call method. But whenever it is a CDS table function, how we can call that particular method? That is, of course, a good thing to know. For that, we have to copy the name of CDS table function, and any sort of CDS artifact behaves like a database artifact, and we have to call it via a select query. So I can say call CDS table function. Here you would be specifying select star from my this. Here you would be getting the format that you would have to pass while calling that particular method. And here you would be passing the name of the parameter. Okay, and then we would be saying activate this. If we try putting the breakpoint over here and execute this, so now what would happen is the select star from this table function would trigger this table function. This table function would call the implementation which is there in the method. As you can see, there is a static method because we have specifying the name of the class and the method. That's why we change the implementation's definition over here called class method. So it would be a static method. So method is an instance method, class method is a static method. So it would call a static method, and here we would be getting the data from. So if I just say execute now, if I just say 1710, execute, it would say now a debugger is getting open. I'll just say okay, switch to the debugger perspective. And here you would be getting that I do have my call reaching over here. Here PBUKRS is the input that I received. Okay, and I am getting the system's information over here. And upon execution, we can expect all the data to be flown in my output. So here we do have all the data. So CDS table function is one way of calling the AMDP function. Another way to call a AMDP function is via a AMDP, or I can say a database procedure. So a database procedure can call a database function. How we can do that? That is something we would be seeing in some time. Okay. Till the time, is it clear how we can call a database CDS table function into our program, why it is required and all?
One thing, Sumit, why we use static method? Like I am not.
So ultimately, why we use static method is we tried calling the method. Sorry, I think there is a bit of okay. Yeah. So We tried creating an instance method earlier. What we figured out is a direct call to the table function, a direct call to the database function is not possible. We have to call the database function via a CDS table function. When we created a CDS table function, how it is implemented? It is implemented by method. And if you see what is the syntax, the class name double equal to, or I can say equal to arrow and this. And what is this format says? This format says that this is a static method. So a database function, whenever you are creating, it would always be a static method, because a CDS table function is calling that, and CDS table function doesn't have an instance of who would be the caller, and that is why it always requires a static method, and that is why we went with the static method. So that is the basics. You would always be going with a static one.
Mhm.
Okay. This is something that we would be using. CD database function is something that would be used very rarely. Main place where everywhere AMDP would be used, be it a AMDP body or normal AMDP class, wherever you would be creating, you would always be creating database procedure. Reason being, you would be getting an interface which would help you with a multiple returning parameter, multiple exporting parameter. I can't expect you to always call 5 different methods to get 5 results. Instead, you would be calling a method one time and you can expect all 5 results to come as a part of your output in a single method call. And that only a database procedure is capable of doing, not database function. Okay. So what we learned till now. Okay, Gaurav, you were also saying something. Did you have any question?
No, I said yeah, I'm clear for that point.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So what we learned is that what is an AMDP, the type of AMDP methods that we can have, how I can pass the parameters in an AMDP method. Now, what we are planning to learn is how I can pass the select option or a range parameter. Okay, that is something that would be of our interest. So let's just step back a bit. We all know normal method. So what we are now mainly interested in is, knowing how I can have the select options and everything range handled in a AMDP method. That is something which is of our interest right now. What we can have over here is, consider inner selection screen. I don't have. Let's wait for a minute. Now, so what we learned till now is, I can have a report which can have a parameter. That parameter we can use in a filter and we can get the data. But each time parameters is not something that would help us over here. Many a time we want a select option. Many a time we want a range parameter also as an input, and that should also be able to filter down my data. For example, consider I do have a set of information over here called a date. I mean a date input I am passing, and this say a date. I can expect that a date should also be there because the same type is being used there here as well. Let's just say activate this, and let's just switch back to the caller. So for now, let's just comment out the CDS table function calling. We would be coming back to this. I want to call this method now. And here we would be specifying, for example, SA date over here, and here we can say for EKKO A date. It's a normal selection screen designing we are going with. If I just say activate, I have not used this select option till now. We just want to observe the output, how it does look like. After getting the input, we are getting the output over here, which says it's a 13th of December, 2nd of Feb, and everything. Okay. For example, I want to get the information from says from 10th of December to 13th, or I can say 15th of December, get me the output. I can expect that I should only get this set of output. I should not get the remaining records. Okay, this is something I'm expecting. And let's just say I'll just save this variant called var01. I'll just say close this because I want to handle this now. So let's just go step by step. I want to pass this particular select option over here. Select option, whichever I'm getting over here, to my method as an input. Right. So when I want to call this method and I want to pass this particular parameter as an input, what I should be able to pass over here is I should be able to pass this AE date. And for me to pass this AE date, I should also have some sort of receiving parameter as well at the methods level. Right. So I should also have some sort of receiving parameter at my method level, which says how I can receive this particular input we are passing. Correct. So this get PO data DP, which we are having over here, can expect only PBUKRS as an input over here. I am saying on top of this, I want one more input parameter called a pass by value again, and this would be nothing but my where clause. And here I am saying a string, for example. Why a string parameter? Because if you see, this is a normal ABAP method. Here I do have some sort of range. The range parameter I can have saying DUKR, or I can say A date in, and I can pass the range parameter, it would get filtered. So it is very straightforward for a normal method to work, for a normal select query to work with a range parameter. But a range is very much on to the ABAP. SQL script doesn't have a range parameter. It always understands a where clause which is as per standard DBMS standards. Okay. When I want to say a date which is from 10th to 15th, it would say a date which is greater than or equal to 10th of December and less than or equal to 15th of December. Okay. So my only way out would be to convert this date into a string format, and that string format would be nothing but it would be the same kind of format that I can pass directly over here in the where clause. So what I did is I just extended this method with one more where clause. Or I can say, let's just say p where for the parameter. Now, my purpose over here is to extend this where clause in a way that whatever input I am getting in the SEA date should be converted to the string I am looking for. Okay. For that, what I can do over here is I can use the utility to convert the range input into a string input. So there is a utility for that we would be using. That utility is ultimately called as a utility class. Name is CLSHDB, and here we have a selection tabs. It is having one method called combine selection tab, and if you see, it expects certain inputs. What we would be doing over here is we are receiving one parameter called where clause. So I'll just receive this parameter into LV where. This is a very little of our interest. Main thing which would be of our interest is this combine selection tab. It expects few more things as well. I'll just say it has a combine selection tab. If you go into the parameters, it has a importing parameter called IT selection tab. The data type of which is TT name selection tab, and its type is this. So this is a data type. I'll be specifying a variable of this type. I can say LT name selection tabs. This type would be nothing but this. Now, what all things I should be specifying over here? Let me just go inside this. It expects two things. Name. So it would be nothing but the name of the column that you want to filter in the database table. I want to filter down my AE date. So I would be passing AE date over here. And here you have to provide the data reference. Type refer to data. It is very generic. So I have to provide the data reference for my container which is containing these records. So for example, my range variable, I have to provide the reference for that range variable. So what I'll be doing over here is, I'll be just saying, I want to fill this particular LT name selection tab before passing it to this. I can say fill selection tab, which says LT selection tab I am filling. This is a table. How I can fill this? Using a value keyword. We all know that. And what a value keyword, what a selection tab is, it is nothing but a type standard table of. It is a table. So if I want to fill a value in a tabular structure, I would need one more round bracket over here because it is not a structure, it is a table. What all columns we do have? We do have a name. In the name, we have to specify the name of the column. We would be specifying AE date. In the another component called dref, we would be passing the data reference. Here comes the one last new ABAP syntax that we have reserved called reference. It would give the pointer to the variable that you are specifying. It would give the pointer to this particular variable SAE date, and it would generate a reference, object reference for this variable in its memory parameter, pass it on to the combined selection tab, and we can expect LVWhere to be the string format of the user's input. And here we can expect the pwhere is in the input parameter because that is something we enhance the system method signature with. Now we are through till now. Okay, I'll just say source code format, save this, activate this. So where are we? Okay, did I have activated? Let me just activate this first. Okay, so now this is getting activated. So we are through till now. What we just did, we just picked the user's input, which we are getting in the range. We just call a utility method to convert that range input into a string, and we just passed it on to the method. In the method, we have not written anything. But let's just debug the first step, that whether we are through of what we are expecting in the input. Are we getting the same thing? I'll just say breakpoint over here, execute this, Let's just enter the variant that we saved and just say execute. Switch to the debugger perspective. Here in the variable, we are having this lvvar, and what it is giving us, it is saying a date is between this and this. Okay, earlier in the SAE date we were getting IBT this because this is something that the user was inserting in the selection input, and what we just got over here is lvvar clause which says my A date is between this date and this date. So this particular utility method converted this. Now this input should be passed to the method. So that is something we are also doing. Next thing that we should be doing is we should be filtering down the information. We should be able to filter down this set of information we are receiving in the output by considering this p-var. So how I can consider this p-var and pass this particular, or I can say filter down the records first. So I should be able to filter down the information in a way that whenever I am passing the information, the data should be filtered with the select option as well. At the same time, the data should also be filtered with the parameters. So what we can get over here is, I can say, I want the data to be filtered by both of them. For that, we have two steps, or I can say two options. Let's just mark one baseline over here. AMDP gives almost same, I am not saying same, but almost same treatment to a database table and a AMDP gives almost same treatment to the database table and an internal table. Okay, what does this mean? This is something we would be seeing very much in a very soon. So mostly whatever operation, in most of the cases, most of the operation that you perform on a database table, same operation you should also be able to perform on an internal table. For example, if you want to write a select single, or I can say if you want to get the single record from a database, you would write a select single in ABAP. But if you want to read the single record from an internal table, you would write read table with key and something. But in AMDP, at both the places we would write a select query. We don't have a read table in an AMDP. So AMDP, if you want to read, a DB table or an internal table, we would be using select query only for that. Okay, so there is no, or I can say very minor difference when it comes to a database table and internal table. So here what we are getting is, we are having a select query which is giving us the data from EKQ by filtering it on the BUKRS. Next thing I am interested in is the ETPO data that I am getting over here. The ETPO data that I am getting over here, I want this data also to be filtered with the filter condition. So for that, I want to filter the ETPO data again with the filter input. We won't be passing it in the select query because it does not support that. Instead, we do have one more filter application technique. That is something we would be using. So I can say I want to filter my ETPO data over here. Here I'll be writing my apply filter. So this apply filter helps you filter down your data again. And here I'll just say ETPO data I want to filter out as this is a variable. So on right hand side of equal to, if you are writing any sort of variable, it should be preceded with column. Like we are using PBUK same way. We want to filter down the data along with the p where condition. So I'll be just specifying p where. So here we selected the data from EKKO, which is now only specific to the company code user is passing. On top of that, we again filter down the data based on the where condition which the user passed again in the where clause for AE date, for example. So if I just say activate this, okay, and I'll just say execute this as well. Let's just select the range parameter. Here we are getting the records which are specific to 2016. So it is 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. Only the date that we specified, we are only getting the records for that. If you want to only get the record from 10th to 11th, I can just say execute. Right? If you want to give that I want all the records which are only occurring after 11th, and the system would also do that. Okay, this is something that system can take care of that, and this all is occurring because of that utility method that we just specified. What we just did is we just selected the input. So let's just try enhancing this example with one more range, EBELN, for example. And we are saying EBELN, we can have n number of range specified over here. I'll just say execute. So I'm getting all of this, but now I want that I should only get data from 47 to 50. Then again the records would get filtered down to the one that we are specifying. Why are we getting the two records? Wow. This is something which would be of our interest, but this issue we would be tackling in the upcoming session, because this has something to do with the session variables. Okay, and the session variables are very important when it comes to a AMDP. Just to highlight over here, what you are currently getting is we are getting duplicate records. You might finding it as a duplicate, but what it is, AMDP is cross client. AMDP doesn't ask for, but it always, AMDP doesn't ask for, but it always gives you the data. It always gives you the data, which is in all the clients. So for example, here I have S4H 800, I have 810, 820, everything. So system would get the data from all the clients if you are not specifying the current client. So that is why while writing any sort of select query in AMDP, we usually specify the mandate as well in the where clause. That is something we didn't specify because we are just going in that direction. Section variable we would be learning tomorrow. But that is the reason we are getting the information over here. It's a duplicate. Let's just try doing one thing, if that helps. As we don't have client field selected, we won't be passing it over here till now. But yeah, I mean, we would be learning this in upcoming section. Here we are just getting the information because we are having a duplicate information because we are getting data from cross client. So that is a good thing to learn. We would be resolving this issue tomorrow whenever we would be learning session variables. Now, so what we just were able to do is we were able to filter down the information via a AMDP method calling based on the select option input. So we were able to pass select option or range in a AMDP method. Question would be how I can do the same thing in a CDS table function. Answer is very similar. If you don't want to call the AMDP method, instead you want to call the CDS table function. Right. So this CDS table functions interface should have something which would expect the input. So for example, I am saying IV filter, for example. And here, for example, let's just say I want to give some sort of 1000 characters of input as a filter parameter. I can expect that someone user would pass the filter parameter over here. So this filter parameter I can use again I can again go over here and say I want to filter down this information with the input which I am receiving from the user. Okay. So what I would be doing over here is I would be saying filter the EKKO with user filter. So what I just did mention over here earlier, that AMDP gives almost same treatment to the database table and internal table. So here what we did is we tried applying filter on the internal table. Now let's just try applying filter on the database table instead. So what I can have is I can have one more local variable created. So how one way, okay, to create a local tabular variable out of an operational syntax. Simply write name of variable. We do not need to write any sort of declaration over here. All you can do is you can say I want LTEKKO. I have not declared it anywhere to contain the record from uh, EKKO after applying the filter called IV filter over here. After having this, after having LTEKKO, what LTEKKO would be containing? It would be containing the data only. it would be containing the data which is again um, it would contain the data after only applying the filter select option. Now this is a limited set of data. I want to again filter my company code based on that. So what I'll be doing is I would be saying select from this. And here instead of querying the database table, now I would be querying my internal table. So I write select from my internal table, but whenever I'm saying it's a local variable, I would be specifying a colon before that. Unlike the database table. In database table, we usually don't do that. Okay. So here I'll just say activate. We'll just go over here, activate this again. Let's just go back. And here we have to pass one more input parameter called IV filter. And here we would be passing the T, or we can say LV where clause. And I will just say activate this and execute this. 1 second. Do I have any? Here we are getting all the records. Afterwards, let's just say I want only this set of purchase orders. One second. What did just happen? Okay, it's a 21212275. Why it is so? Okay, so now we have the limited range that we just got. It was a broader range we entered by mistake. That is why. So what we just learned is we can pass not only the parameter input, but we can also pass the select options. To pass the select option, we have to use the utility. To pass it in the get PO data database procedure, we can pass it in the parameter. Same goes with the table function internally. What we would be doing over here is we would be using an apply filter. So there is a one utility that we should be learning. Apply filter can be applied on a database table like EKKO or in an internal table as well. On internal table, when we are specifying, we have to use colon. On database table, if you are specifying, we have to use EKKO. The variable on the left hand side would be auto declared. We don't have to declare it explicitly. And then we can also write a select statement over here. One important thing that we would be learning, which would help us remove the duplicates as well, called session variables. That is something we would be learning tomorrow. Okay, but this is how we can also pass the range or select option in a CDS table function. Is it clear to everyone? I know it's a very huge content to grasp, digest in the very first section of AMDP, but this is how the database procedure is versatile. It is a whole new language that we are learning. We just started with something that we know. Again, we would be learning with database declaration, if, loop, and everything. A full new SQL language that we would be learning, and we would be writing in the same editor where actually ABAP code is also written. Here it is a SQL script. This is full SQL script that we are writing. And this is a very tiny example of what we are going to cover. This is very tiniest one. We would have more examples coming on our way. Is it clear?
Uh, uh, uh,
Yes.
with how to take that performance and how to find a standard AMDP.
How to find a standard AMDPs?
Yes.
So there are multiple ways to find a standard AMDP. First of all, you can let's just say if you want to search for AMDP body, whatever body that you are searching for, you would be checking whether AMDP body checkbox is there or not. There is something we would be learning in the very last session in the AMDP, where we would be learning AMDP body. Second way is what we are doing over here is we are using one interface. This is the interface that we are using, and this interface should be there whenever it's an AMDP body or whenever it is an AMDP method. Okay, so what we can do is you can directly say this and you can search for all the classes which is consuming this interface. So these are all the classes which are having that interface. And this way you would be able to figure out any sort of AMDP classes which are there. So these are all the standard, custom, whatever kind of AMDP relevant classes are there. These all the things you would be able to find. So for example, if I just open this, okay, it is having AMDP marker. To go in the methods, you would be finding all this particular method which are AMDP classes and everything. These all things are written into AMDP, and this is how you would be able to figure out. The main point to figure it out what all AMDP classes are there. This interface is something that you can use for tracking. This interface should be there. If it is not there, then it cannot be an AMDP class or AMDP method. Same goes with the bombs. So if you see, there is a business bill of material relevant all the AMDP classes that you are able to find. You would be able to find it over here. Bomb RTO to quantity, convert. So if you see, these are all standard AMDP classes. Does it make sense? Okay. Anyone else having any question? Okay, perfect. Yeah, then thank you everyone for joining. This is something that we had for today's session. So we kick-started with the basics, try converting something that we already know into ABAP, and we are now into AMDP. We would be extending this knowledge again, and we would be learning the full SQL script, a full new language, and we would be meeting again at the same time tomorrow then. Okay. Okay then. Thank you so much. See you again tomorrow. Bye bye.